Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition here of Chalk Talk here with Coach Little C. Happy holidays to you. Good to be back for another week. A lot going on. We had the conference championship games last week, which I'm going to try to dive into as many of them as I can. I think there's only really about three or four worth talking about. I'll get into some of the Heisman finalists that were announced just this week on who I think is going to win the Heisman Trophy and who was snubbed and should have been on that list. I'll look at some of the 12 teams, the matchups. I won't pick any of those matchups. I'll probably pick some of those on next week's show. I think there's some intriguing matchups. I do think there's going to have to be an upset somewhere in those games. So I'll dive into those. If you have any questions, comments for me along the way, make sure you put them in. If you're watching me on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, you can put them in the comments. I'll try to get to as many of them as I can. The big news I announced last night, for podcast listeners, if you like just the audio, I'm now on Apple Podcast, and I'm now on Spotify, and I am now on iHeartRadio. So some exciting news. I'll have a nice show for you on Sunday on the Mohawk Valley Sports Watch. I'll talk to friends of the show, former New York Mills alum Kevin Cahill, the head coach of Lehigh, coming off a Patriot League championship. I'll talk to Kevin on Sunday morning, and then I'll talk to Coach Curtis Schmidt and his nephew is going to join me on Sunday morning on the Mohawk Valley Sports Watch. So I want to talk about this Big Ten championship game from last week. And I know that Oregon beat Penn State 45-37, but I will say this. I was really impressed by Penn State. Extremely, extremely impressed by Penn State, because at first when the game started, I said, Penn State's going to get rolled out of this building. Because I didn't think Penn State was really going to have the firepower, because they really don't have a lot on the outside. I said Penn State's strengths are really that front four, that defense and stopping the run was really good. The Knoxman, James Franklin can't win a big game. And I'm going to say this. I was really impressed with the play calling of Penn State. I thought Drew Aller played his best games. I know he had the two interceptions. He threw the one late in the game when they had the ball last, and I thought it was a really stupid throw. Horrible mistake on his part. But I think for the most part, when you watch that game, you say, as a whole, Penn State rushed for almost 300 yards against Oregon. That's the worst Oregon's defense has looked all season. They've been one of the top defenses. They've been good against the run. They've been really good in the secondary. Athletes galore running all over the place on offense. Penn State moved the football. And I'll tell you what, most people, when you watch Penn State all year and you watch the game, and here's how I looked at this before the game started. Penn State played Ohio State well. They had a few horrible plays late in that fourth quarter against the Buckeyes down on the goal line when they put the 290-pound lineman in the slot receiver. They motioned them in the backfield, and then they didn't even run it towards them. They didn't use them to block. 3 times they pounded it straight ahead against Ohio State. Didn't get him. So they were a touchdown away from beating, or at least tying, Ohio State. And you never know what would happen. Ohio State, if Will Howard doesn't go down, they probably kick the game-winning field goal, and they probably beat Oregon at Oregon during the year. So I really think that Penn State, Ohio State, and Oregon are right there. Oregon's been the best team all season. There's no doubt about that. But I think they looked a little vulnerable against Penn State. I think the physicality up front at Penn State, Katron Allen had 124 yards rushing. Nick Singleton had 105 yards rushing. I think the other key for me when I watched that game was I thought Drew Aller used his legs good. On third down, if nothing was there, he tucked it and he ran. And I think that's what Penn State fans in that offense has been waiting for all season. So I was really, really, I was really impressed by the way Penn State hung around in that game. And I think the two of them could meet up again. And I really think, and we'll get to it when I get into the playoffs, is Penn State's got a pretty good path to get there. Oregon is the 1 seed. They got to reseed this thing, and I'm sure next year they'll look at this. They got to reseed it because Oregon, the number 1 seed, has, in my eyes, and I'm sure in most people's eyes have been following college football, they got to play the winner of Ohio State and Tennessee in that second round, in that quarterfinal matchup. That's a brutal game because Ohio State can beat them, and Tennessee's got all the talent in the world too to beat them. So that's going to be an interesting matchup. Dylan Gabriel, I've watched him for the last 3 years. You watch Bo Nix in this Oregon offense, it's that, let's throw the screens out, let's get these athletes in space. It almost reminds me as if you're watching Ohio State play from years ago. And really and truly, if that Ohio State offense played like Oregon's offense did against Penn State, get those athletes against space, they would have ran Michigan out of the building. They would have hammered Michigan in the game. So when I watch Oregon, it almost reminds me of those Ohio State loaded on the outsides, and they just throw the ball all over the place. And Dylan Gabriel's a good quarterback. I'm not knocking him. And I think when you look at the 12-team playoff and you look at all the quarterbacks, and when we go through it, I'm going to go through a few things. He's probably the one you trust the most right now out of any of the 12 teams. So you probably would say you got to lean on a team right now. You probably lean Oregon. I just think their path is really tough. And Piznat says, good to see the Piznat. He says, I think we're going to, absolutely they do. I think they got to reseed it. I would like them to see, I'd like them to see maybe next year either reseed this thing, do away with the automatic bids, maybe do it like the FCS. You got 1 through 12, whether it's 112, 211, 310, or keep it the way it is and then reseed it. But Oregon to play the winner of Ohio State, Tennessee is brutal. So Piznat, I agree with you, man. I think they got a brutal schedule. But if you go back to Oregon, and I want to go back just for a second because they did, I mean, they're balanced. Tez Johnson is the real deal on the outside. And I think Dan Lanning, I was never really a huge Dan Lanning fan. Dan Lanning's growing on me big time. I think his players like him. I think he's a good motivator. They are the most talented team other than I'm still going to say this, and you guys have heard me for the last 2 to 3 weeks. I'm not changing my pick. I'm still riding with the Buckeyes. I think they're the most talented team in the country. They just have a Michigan problem. I've said this for the last, I don't know how many weeks. Ryan Day chokes up against Michigan. He wants to play and say, I'm more physical than Michigan. We're going to just pound the football. They get completely away from their game. And Sharon Moore outcoached them. But we're not going to go backwards. We're moving forward here. If Ryan Day loses the opening game against Tennessee at home, Ryan Day's gone. Ryan Day's going to get fired immediately on the spot. And Mike's saying they're already, let's see, Mike says that they're already talking about having, yeah, I would agree. I think you got to get it to 14, or I think the FCS has 16 teams that get in. But then you're going to get into, and I was reading a thing today, that I heard that they want to expand March Madness to like 74 teams or something crazy. And then it's going to be, okay, now we used to talk and debate, all right, who's 61, 62, who's the last two in, or the last three, and now we're going to be saying, all right, who's team 75 and 76? Because if you look at the 12-team playoffs, imagine if it was only the top 4 that got in this year versus the 12. So I don't have a problem with the 12 teams. I think the way that they formatted it with the automatic conference winners, that they get in and get the buys, and then who's ever seeded the highest. That's why Boise State got a bye, and so did Arizona State. But I think you got to do away with that. But I was really impressed with Penn State, and I think Penn State's got a really good run that I think they can make. The other one we got to talk a little bit about here is the SEC championship game. I'm not 100% sold on Texas. If you go back and you look at Texas's schedule, they haven't played anybody all year. The only 2 teams they played that they lost 2 close games was to Georgia. And I'm going to say this. I love Steve Sarkisian. I've always liked Steve Sarkisian. Always. I think he's one of the best offensive minds in college football. I think he's fantastic. He's got to bench Quinn Ewers, and he's got to start Archie Manning. He's got to start Manning. Manning gives them the best chance to win. I've said it all year round. He can run the ball. He's got the big arm. When he's in the game, there's excitement. People are jumping around. When Ewers is in there, he just kind of gets back. He kind of lost the ball and it didn't look the greatest at all. So I think if Texas wants to win, I think he's got to go to Archie Manning. I really do. Now, listen, Quinn Ewers had 2 interceptions, and I thought they were going to go to Arch Manning. He was sacked 6 times. They got really good receivers on the outside at Texas. They're loaded. The roster is loaded. So Steve Sarkisian has recruited, and Sarkisian's going to win in the SEC. But look at their schedule. They didn't play a lot of tough games in the SEC their first year. So I really, really, really think that if they can get it right at the quarterback spot, how about what's Archie Manning going to do next year? I know people are saying he's going to come back because the job's his. How about if we went in a portal? He'd probably go anywhere he wants. I'm sure the NIL deal, I'm sure he'd find money, somewhere. But, we'll see. Now we don't know what's going to go on with Georgia. Carson Beck had the injury. They're saying it's his elbow. Now, again, he's probably got at least 4 weeks to rest. But what I'm hearing is it could be Tommy John. Now, if it's that, they're in trouble. They're in big trouble because I don't know if they're going to have enough with Gunnar Stockton, the sophomore quarterback, who just hasn't taken a lot of snaps. I know some people are saying maybe with Stockton they're better than Beck. They're not better without Carson Beck. And Carson Beck hasn't had a really good year. But the thing I think with Georgia, and I haven't seen too much of them yet, they don't have the athletes on the outside that they've had in the past. And what I mean by that is I think Carson Beck coming into the year, all you heard was he's the first quarterback off the board. That's all you heard coming into the season. And I think he was trying to make the big play. He was trying to hit the home run ball at the start of the season, had a lot of interceptions. Then he played really good down the stretch. And to me, hasn't really looked like the Beck from the last 2 years. So this Stockton kid, I think we just don't know enough about him. He hasn't taken a lot of snaps, but he came in. They look like they gave him a little bit of spark. Kirby Smart's going to win games because that defense is pretty good. That front four, his backers, they're athletic all over the field. They can run. Texas could not run the football at all against Georgia's front. So I think if Georgia's going to win this thing, when you say offense wins games, defense wins championships, I think they're going to have to rely on that defense if Carson Beck don't play. And if Beck does play, how healthy is he going to be? I don't think anybody really knows that. But I think Steve Sarkisian, I think he's got to make his mind up at quarterback. I know he's got a really good relationship with Quinn Ewers, but at this point, you're in the 12-team playoff. If Arch gives you the best chance to win games, then you got to go on Archie Manning. The other one, I was really surprised at this too, because again, I'm not a huge Dabo Swinney fan by any means, but I got to give Dabo a little credit. Now, they were lucky to win this game because the second half SMU rolled. And when you watch that game, I think if you were watching, you probably said to yourself, SMU, the second half, outscored Clemson 24-10. They just got behind the ball to start the game. They were down 24-7. And Cade Klubnik's been fantastic for Clemson. One thing I'm going to say is I think he has really developed this season. And I think Clemson's done a really good job developing Klubnik. He threw for 262 or 265, 4 touchdowns, didn't turn it over, but they couldn't run the football against SMU. I've been saying this, SMU is going to be a tough out in the 12-team playoff because I still think they were the best team in the ACC. Clemson got really lucky. SMU had that missed field goal at the end. Second half, SMU dominated the game. But again, tip your hat to Dabo, who's at the end of the game, again, thanked Fran Brown for, beating Miami, giving Clemson a shot. Nobody is giving Clemson a shot at all to beat Texas. Nobody. And I still think at some point in time in these 12-team playoffs, you are going to see an upset. And I'm not going to pick these games yet because I'm still looking through it saying, where do I see it? Am I going to pick with my heart or am I going to pick with what I think? So tonight I'm not going to give you my picks. I'm just going to kind of give you my thoughts. The Mountain West game, Boise State, I don't know. Boise State hasn't played anybody either. My son loves Ashton Jeanty, the back, who's had a fantastic year. Almost 2,500 yards rushing, 29 touchdowns. But he's had 340-something carries. And I think he's really good. UNLV struggled. I mean, I think that was a kind of a boring game. And everybody said, well, Jeanty should win the Heisman Trophy. Listen, on any other year, what he's doing as a running back, you're not going to see probably again for a while. He had 31 carries for 209 and a touchdown. He's now up to 2,400, almost 2,500 yards. They really didn't throw the ball that much. And UNLV is not known for throwing. They struggle to move the football at times. But how good's Boise State? Can Boise State jump in the 12-team playoff and beat somebody where you're going to have to travel to go play at Boise on that blue turf when it'll probably be snowing, cold? Who would want to go play in that type of weather? But I'm really excited to see who they get, because whoever they get, the key is going to be, can they stop the run? And I think that's going to be key. And we'll see. I don't think anybody really thought UNLV was going to give any chance to beat Boise State. I didn't. The other games, I'm not going to spend too much time on the Big 12 or the American Athletic. The job Kenny Dillinham's done with Arizona State is second to none. I love Matt Campbell, one of my favorite coaches. When the Michigan job was open before Jim Harbaugh got it, I was hoping Matt Campbell would get that job. But you watch Arizona State play, and I'll tell you what, they were picked dead last in the Big 12. Dead last. I still would have liked to seen Colorado in there against Arizona State. I still think Colorado was the best team in the Big 12. Now Colorado's going to get a chance to play BYU, who was another one of the top Big 12 teams. But when you watch this Arizona State team play, you watch the back Scatterboo, who at the end of the game they said, he's the best back in the country. He doesn't think anybody can beat. You got to like the swag. You got to like the confidence in the kid. He reminds me of the kid from Stanford, and I was trying to think of the name. If you guys are listening, you guys are going to probably remember the name. He was the back for Stanford that Jim Harbaugh had. Was tough, hard-nosed kid. Ran the ball really hard, and I can't think of his name. But if you watch them, they run the football. They got the freshman quarterback, Levitt, who's really good, doesn't really make a mistake. They rush for almost 300 yards against a really tough up front. Matt Campbell's teams are always tough. They're always hard-nosed. They're loaded. I mean, they got a lot of weapons. Now, the only thing they don't have, their stud wide receivers out for the year. And they still put up 45 points. So it'll be really interesting to see in the playoff, can they jump up and beat somebody? Man, I don't know. I think they can. I think they're better than what I thought. The question is going to be, can they attack downfield if they get behind? But, man, Kenny Dillingham's done a hell of a job this year in his first year as head coach. Mike says, Richie, no, I'm not thinking of him. It'll come to me because they were talking about it. They were talking about him last night. I said, that's exactly who he reminds me of, was the kid from Stanford. And it'll come to me by the end of the show. The American Athletic, listen, I think the Army story was really good. If they were anybody else, they're 11-1. People are saying, should they get snubbed? Should they have been in the playoff? Listen, I'll say this: their quarterback Bryson Dalis Sr., man, hats off. He's rushed for almost 1,500 yards. He's had 29 touchdowns, which basically is ties Genty for the most touchdowns, rushing touchdowns in college football. But 11-1 again. The schedule, they weren't ranked that high. If they were ranked a little bit higher, maybe Army gets into the playoff. Now you got the Army-Navy game this week, which that'll be a fantastic game. I think Navy's like 9-3 against 11-1 Army. But this game really didn't mean much, so I didn't really pay too much attention to that one. Now, we do have this weekend, which I was a little surprised at a few things. So the Heisman Trophy finalists were introduced this week. So we learned Travis Hunter, the unicorn. We'll talk about him here in a minute. Cam Ward, the quarterback for Miami. Dylan Gabriel, the quarterback from Oregon, and Genty were all announced as they're the finalists. What I don't understand was this. And you guys know how I felt about Colorado this year, and everybody knows I was on the bandwagon all year of what Colorado and Coach Prime has done. I think Coach Prime should have won Coach of the Year, but we can get into that topic another time. So let's talk about these four candidates. I think they're really interesting. And I'm going to start with Genty first. Put his numbers up here on the board. Almost 30 touchdowns. He's going to break the all-time rushing record, which which I believe was held by, I don't know if it was Eric Dickerson who's got the record or if it's Barry Sanders, one of those two. He's going to rush for over 2,500 yards. He's got 29 touchdowns. As a team, this is where I want you to look at this for a minute. As a team, they have 3,200 yards rushing as a team. He's had 344 carries. That's the most in the country as far as carries go. That's a lot of carries. I just want to see when this kid and I'm not knocking him at all. I think if this was any other year where you didn't have a Travis Hunter, he walks away with the Heisman Trophy. I think it's just unfortunate. I said last week, it reminds me of the year that Peyton Manning had all the stats at Tennessee, and everybody said Peyton Manning was going to walk away with this thing. Charles Woodson won the Heisman Trophy, who's very similar to a Travis Hunter. But Genty by far is the best back. He'll probably be a first-round talent. He's a big bruiser. He's got speed. He's got great hands. He can block. He's your NFL-type back. And I think in all the mock drafts, I think I see him going to the Cowboys in the first round. But again, if this was any other year, now listen, he may win it. He may win it, but I just think with all the publicity, everybody's social media, you see all these podcasts and all these NFL players, they're all talking. Travis Hunter won this thing weeks ago. I think Travis Hunter won this thing midway through the year. And not because I'm a homer. If you think about what we've seen from him, and I think it's fantastic. I watched last night, and I'm going to recommend this. Follow I think it's Well Off Media. It's Deion's son, Deion Jr.'s son's podcast, which is fantastic. They give you all the ins and outs of Colorado practices, games, all the behind the scenes. I like to follow the pivot with Ryan Clark, Fred Taylor, and Channing Crowder. And if you watch the latest episode that they have, Mike's saying, surely not touchdown Tommy Vardell. No, it's not him either. God, it's got to come to me. I got to look it up. But anyways, if you watch that podcast, they interview Travis Hunter, and I think it's one of the best interviews and how humble the kid is. But what I think what's crazy about what we've seen from him this year is he doesn't come off the field. So when you sit back and say, okay, he might be the best receiver in the country. He also might be the best defensive back in the country, and he's probably the best athlete in the country. How he wasn't a finalist for the Thorpe Award is beyond me because he is the best defensive back in the country. But for somebody like that to not come off the field, and one of the guys, Channing Crowder, asked him last night, this was a really good question. He said, Travis, I'm all about you, brother. But he said, I got to ask you a question. If you think you're going to go out there and cover Jamar Chase and then turn around and have to and go play wide receiver and get defended by some of the best cornerbacks in the league, you're crazy. And Travis Hunter says, why can't I do it? So if you sit down with an NFL team in the offseason, they're going to ask you, and this is what Ryan Clark said, and they're all NFL guys, so they know. They're going to say, Travis, if we draft you number one, we just want you to play offense. What would you say to that? And he says, well, ask Coach Prime. I really think that this kid is so humble to say that because can you imagine going out there on defense to go defend Jamar Chase and then turn around and have to go play receiver and get defended by some of the best cornerback, Patrick Surtain, whoever, right? In college, this kid doesn't come off the field. He plays 100 and something snaps. And Coach Prime says when the game's over, like he doesn't practice with the team Monday and Tuesday. He lets Travis Hunter sit out of practice for 2 days to recover. And then he practices like 2 days. And then he plays in the game. I just don't think you're going to see another athlete like that in college. So to me, and I've always said this since I was a little kid, when people say who should win the Heisman Trophy, for the most part, it's always the quarterbacks with the big numbers or the running backs like Genty with the big numbers. I've always said I think it should go to the best all-around athlete in college football. That's what I think the Heisman Trophy symbolizes to me. And I think right now, when you look at that, I think it's Travis Hunter. Now, we'll go to the two quarterbacks here. Because I put up Dylan Gabriel's stats. They're good. And Cody, I know you're listening. Shedeur Sanders should have been at the height. It should be there this weekend. Shedeur Sanders has better numbers than both these quarterbacks. The only reason why, Cody, you're not going to like it. The only reason why Dylan Gabriel's in it, he's in the playoffs. And he's on the number one team in the country. They were not going to leave him off. Cam Ward, I get it. He should be there as well. I'll put his numbers up here in a minute. So Gabriel, 3,500 yards. He's got 28 touchdowns, 6 picks, 73% completions. He's only been sacked 6 times all year, which is really good. But they get rid of the ball. They throw the ball out in space. They don't really throw the ball too much downfield. Now, again, when I watched that Penn State game, they had those crossing routes over the middle that reminded me of Michigan and Ohio State years ago when Don Brown wanted to play man coverage. And they were running around. I said, geez, but how were these receivers getting so wide open? And it was like, wow. So, I mean, he's had a great year. There's no doubt about it. The kid's a winner. He's on the best team in the country. He's probably the most, I would say he's the quarterback you can trust the most out of the 12 teams that are left. But I don't know how you keep Shedeur Sanders out of there. And maybe it comes back to the Deion thing, that a lot of these guys just are against Deion. They don't like him. But his son won the Johnny Unitas Award for the top quarterback in college football. The Piznet says Sanders should be there, no doubt. I don't know how he's not. I don't. I think he's the best quarterback in the country. He's going to be your first quarterback off the board. He's the best quarterback in the country. There's no doubt about that. Let's see. Mike says, Campbell compared him to David Montgomery, not a Stanford guy. Yep. Cody says, it works. Fastest team in the country. Yeah. We'll see. You know how I feel. I'm not knocking Oregon and the Ducks at all. They're definitely the best team in the country. But Cam Ward's had a good year. I'll put his stuff up here. 36 touchdowns, only 7 picks. Miami was really interesting this year. Great offense, no defense. The Syracuse game hurt them big time. I think that decision for Miami in that game to not go for it, and they decided, I think, to kick the field goal against Syracuse, ended up coming back and costing them the game. But he deserves to be there. I keep seeing that the Giants may go get him. I think the Giants will get Shedeur, but we'll see how that pans out. And then, of course, the other one, Travis Hunter, 1,100 yards receiving, 14 touchdowns, 4 picks. I think one of the funny things I was watching too is somebody said to Deion Sanders, well, he doesn't have a lot of tackles. And Deion started laughing at the report. He goes, are you kidding me right now with that question? Deion goes, if the corner's got to make a lot of tackles, that's not good. They don't throw at him. He's made some big plays in the run game, but they don't throw at him. I think he gave up 1 touchdown, Travis Hunter said. He goes, it was my bad. It was my fault. But then, the next series I picked one off. I mean, the kid's going to make mistakes. Imagine him next year with these NFL guys, how much they're going to go at him. I can't wait to see him at the next level. I can't wait to see him. But how could you say that the kid doesn't have a lot of tackles? What would you say to that, Deion? He's a cornerback. My corner shouldn't be making a lot of tackles. So I thought that was kind of crazy. All right, here's some of the opening round games. Clemson's going to play Texas, and the winner gets Arizona State, which would be in the Peach Bowl. And again, I'm not going to break these games down yet because next week I'll pick these games on here. I don't think anybody's giving Clemson a shot at all. This is going to be at Texas. I don't think many people are going to pick Clemson. I haven't seen the lines yet. I know they're out. I haven't looked yet. Some people are saying, the winner of this game, could they beat Arizona State? If it's Texas, maybe it's there's got to be an upset somewhere. And I don't know if it's in this game. I don't know if Clemson, but again, Texas hasn't played anybody. Georgia's physical up front. Clemson struggled to run the ball. They've had a lot of success throwing the ball with Cade Klubnik. So we'll see. And then the winner would get Arizona State. So I think that's an interesting one. Tennessee, Ohio State to me is probably the best game of all these. And I know a lot of people when the 12 teams came out, they said, well, Bama got screwed. And I kind of gave you guys my thoughts on the Bama thing the week before. When you lose 24-3 to Oklahoma, you lose to Vandy. There was no way. Now, I think from the ACC championship game, when the first half was 24-7, I said to myself, they're going to get blown out. SMU's out. Bama's in. They're not going to put SMU in after getting blown out to Clemson in a weak ACC where Clemson really wouldn't have got in if Syracuse didn't win. But then I think the way SMU finished, they dominated that second half. I think people said, yep, they should get in. And they shouldn't get penalized, right? Because some of the coaches said, why play in these conference championship games? If you lose it, you got a shot to get bumped out of the playoff when you got Indiana, you got Ohio State that didn't make it, and they get to watch and say, well, we're in no matter what happens. Like, that's just not fair. So I'm glad it played out the way it did. And I know some Bama fans are ticked. Bama didn't play that great of a schedule either. But again, you lose to Vandy. You lose to Oklahoma, that's horrendous. So they didn't get in. But anyways, this is going to be a really good game in Columbus. And I'm still going to pick the Buckeyes. Again, I'm not changing my pick. I think they're more talented. I think this is going to be a really good game on a couple different reasons. And next week when I break it down, I'll give you a couple of them. But, could you imagine this game in Columbus? Now, my wife and I were there when they played Purdue, and it was cold. I can't imagine this game, December 20th, December 21st, could be snowing, 15 degrees, 20 degrees, full house. What if Ohio State's losing early? Do the Boo Birds come out for Ryan Day? And then if he loses at home. So he'd have lost his last two home games to Michigan and Tennessee at home, at the Shoe. I don't know if he'd even survive. I think they'd fire him as he walked off the field. I remember when Herm Edwards was at Arizona State after the last game. They showed this clip. Herm was walking, and I liked Herm. I know he got in trouble at Arizona State, but I love him on NFL game day. He was walking off the field. The athletic director was standing right there on the sideline. And you can see the athletic director kind of embrace him, and you look at Herm Edwards' face, and it's like, oh my goodness. I think Herm Edwards just got fired on the field. He did. He got fired right after the game. And if I'm the AD at Ohio State, I've said this before. Ryan Day is 66-10 against everybody, but he's 1-4 against Michigan or 0-4 against Michigan the last 4 years. So he's got a Michigan problem. The fans there are restless as hell. They want to get rid of him so bad. The only way that probably goes away is he wins a national championship. And really, to this day, I've asked a lot of Ohio State fans. My good buddy down in Columbus is a diehard Ohio State fan. If I asked him, Nick, if you win a national, would you rather win the national championship or beat Michigan? I don't know. I think 9 out of 10 people would say, look, we got to beat Michigan. He's got to beat Michigan. I think a national championship makes it a little bit easier on Ryan Day, saying, well, we won the national championship, coach, but you didn't beat Michigan in the game. So I'm just saying, could he lose that opener? Sure he can. Tennessee's got athletes. That defense for Tennessee is really good. Now, Nico, the freshman quarterback, we'll see. They got some weapons. They can run the football. We'll see defensively what they do against Ohio State. Michigan says 1-4. Yeah, that's what I thought. So I think that's a really good game. And then the winner gets Oregon. The number one seed is going to either play Ohio State that should have beat them or Tennessee that's got just as good athletes as they have. And it would be in the Rose Bowl on the neutral field. It's a tough matchup, man. It's a tough matchup. This is going to be a really good one because I think everybody's saying Penn State, and I'm going to agree with this too. On paper, Penn State's got the easiest path to at least the semifinals, right? You would have to think that. They're going to be a double digit. They should be. And again, I haven't seen the lines yet. So, Pizna, you want to post lines tonight, I'll share them. I haven't seen them yet, but I would imagine Penn State's a double digit favorite over SMU. It's going to be a whiteout, which I think is awesome for Penn State. SMU is really good. Could this be one of the games where you see the upset that SMU beats Penn State and goes in on a whiteout game? in Happy Valley, which again is a tough place to play. And then if Penn State wins that, they're probably a double-digit favorite over number 3 Boise State, which would be in the Fiesta Bowl. So I think on paper, again, you say to yourself, all right, Oregon just beat Penn State in the Big Ten title game. Penn State loses, and Penn State's got to go play number 11, and then they got to go play Boise State. So probably punch their ticket to the semifinals. There's got to be an upset. Piznat, if you're watching, man, I know there's got to be an upset somewhere. And it might be in the next game that I pull up here in a minute, but this will be a really good. And James Franklin has a really good chance because the knock on Franklin is he can't win the big game either. Can't beat Ohio State or Michigan. He was right there against Oregon, just like Ohio State was. I thought they played a really good game. Could SMU beat? I think SMU can beat Penn State. I just don't know if they're going to go travel in that whiteout game in front of 108, 110,000 people and go beat Penn State there. But on a neutral field, Penn State, Boise, what would Genty do against that front four of Penn State? One of the best run defenses in all of college football. And I said a couple of weeks ago, I said, for anybody in the playoff that has to travel to Penn State against that defense, that front four, that front seven, good luck. And SMU, who has a good run game, we'll see what they do against Penn State, and then we'll see what Genty would do potentially against that front four of Penn State. And then the last game here, folks, and I'll shut it off here for tonight. There's been some people, and I was watching this the other night. Rick Neuheisel, who I love Neuheisel, and I love Chris Childers on Full Ride. And I've had Chris Childers on with me, who's one of the best guys to talk sports with. Rick Neuheisel picked Indiana to beat Notre Dame. And he says, Indiana's really good against the run. Notre Dame's like 50th, I think, in rushing offense. I think Notre Dame is really good. I think since that loss to NIU, I think they're a sleeper to me. And if they were in a conference, they'd be one of the 4 buys, without a doubt. But this Notre Dame team, to me, has been peaking. I think the way they've utilized Riley Leonard here the last 3-4 games of the year. Now, the knock's going to be, again, similar to Indiana. Notre Dame hasn't played anybody. They played USC, they played Army, they played Navy. They had the loss to NIU. Indiana, the only real game they played, they lost against Ohio State. It wasn't even really a game. They should have lost to Michigan if Michigan had any offense. They struggled to do anything up front against Michigan's front four, which Ohio State did too. So this is a really good matchup. Vinny D says Penn State. Yeah, Vin, that's a big line. I think that's going to go up even more. I really do. I wouldn't be surprised if that's double digits by the time they kick off. But Penn State minus 8.5, man, that's a big number. Jay saying Boise wins. Yeah, I mean, listen, they definitely can. I mean, maybe Boise's better than I think they are. I'm the old school. I'm a young guy in an old school body because I love the teams that are sit and just pound the football and say, we're going to come at you, beat us. You know what we're going to do? We're going to pound the Heisman finalist Genty 30, 40 times a game. You got to stop us. But we'll see. Could Boise win? Yeah, maybe Boise State's the upset. Maybe Boise State makes a run in this thing, deep. But a lot of people, Neuheisel's picked Indiana. I've seen a little bit on Twitter of people saying Indiana can beat Notre Dame. And these two teams haven't played since like 1951, 1952. This might be one of those ones where they try to make this thing happen to Indiana schools. Maybe this turns into a rivalry game. Now, the winner would get Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. And again, Georgia's going to be close to home, man. I think it sets up good for Georgia to make a run. But again, as I said earlier on the show, you don't know what you're going to get with Carson Beck if they're going to have him. This Notre Dame team's peaking, though. I can see Notre Dame making a good run deep into this thing. And I think that'll be the fun part about this 12-team playoff. Again, do they get the 12 teams right? I think so. I think they're stuck with the format of how they set it up, of how these teams got seeded. But I think we'll have some good matchups. I don't really think you're going to see a lot of blowouts. I'm anxious to see what Arizona State does. I'm anxious to see what Boise State's going to do. I think the 8-9 game Tennessee and Ohio State's the best matchup of all these games in the first round. Talent on both sides, skill guys galore. I think Tennessee's defense is good. I think Ohio State's going to come back and say we have something to prove after the last time we were in the stadium. So I think it's going to be a really, really Really, really good game. Let's see. Tony says North Carolina is winning a natty in football in 3 years. Breaks my heart. Yeah, I saw the news today with Bill Belichick, who took the job as the head coach. I really was impressed, and I didn't have any notes for this, but I got a few minutes here. I was really impressed with what Belichick said. And I think one of the things with podcasting it does, I think he's been really good on the Manning podcast on Monday Night Football. I think you see Belichick kind of open up a little bit more, kind of similar to Nick Saban. I think Nick Saban's fantastic on College Game Day. I didn't know how Saban would be on game day, but I love him. And I'm not a huge Nick Saban guy. But I think Belichick made some good points. He says, I'm going to turn North Carolina, and maybe this is because Prime started it, right? Prime was the first big name to go to college with all the flash and the bright lights. I'm bringing my Louis with me. I'm bringing my luggage with me. We come and all that stuff, and marketing galore genius that he is, and the money he's brought in there is phenomenal to bowl with. And then I sit back and I listen to Bill Belichick, who said, I'm going to turn North Carolina into a pipeline to the NFL. And he said something that was intriguing to me when he says, now with the NIL, you have a general manager basically with all these teams. It's like the NFL. He's not going to go recruit high school kids. If you think a 72-year-old Bill Belichick's going to go knock on some ninth grader's door, 10th grader's door, and sit in a living room and sell mom and dad on how to go to North Carolina, you're absolutely crazy. It's not happening. But he says, we're going to have NFL coaches. We're going to do it the NFL way. And if your kids come to North Carolina and you want to hit the portal and come play for us, they're going to be NFL ready. He's going to run it like an NFL program all around from A to Z. He's going to probably bring Matt Patricia in to be the defensive coordinator, or I think he's going to bring his son with him, because I think part of the deal was when Belichick's done in 3 years, his son's the coach in waiting. Now, sometimes that doesn't happen. It doesn't work out. Like if Bill doesn't do well his first 2 years, would they fire Belichick? Maybe. I think he signed a 3-year, $30 million deal, so $10 million a year. I don't know in the NFL, like I didn't look at some of the top salaries, but I would bet you $10 million in college is probably more than some of the NFL guys make, the good guys. So I think he's going to be able to go in there and run it like an. Now, if you didn't have the NIL, I don't think Bill Belichick even considers this North Carolina job. Now, what I feel sorry for is I was a big Mac Brown guy, loved Mac Brown. So you fire the 73-year-old Mac Brown, but you hire the 72-year-old Bill Belichick, arguably the greatest coach of our generation that we've seen. And I think it's intriguing to say North Carolina is going to be basically run like an NFL program. He's going to basically be like the general manager, and it's going to be all about the portal. But think about if you're a college kid playing somewhere else. Like I'd go play for Dion. Now you have a Hall of Fame coach that's coached Tom Brady, that's won what, 7 Super Bowls. Man, that's intriguing to go play for Bill Belichick as a college kid. I think North Carolina is going to be good. I think he's going to win games. I do. I think he's going to win games. Now, what I'm really surprised at is there's going to be NFL jobs open next year. Now, this past year, really the only job that he was rumored to be at least a candidate for was the Atlanta job. I didn't really hear of anything else. Now, I don't know if Mike McCarthy's going to come back as the Dallas coach. I don't know. Maybe is that Coach Prime to Dallas as the coach? But I thought Belichick had a good relationship there with Jerry Jones. And there's going to be NFL jobs open. So why take this one? Why North Carolina? That's the big question. But they got a lot of money. And if he's going to be able to run it like an NFL program or bring in his guys, NFL guys, I think he can win there. I do. They got the facilities, and they sure as hell got the money. So I want to give a shout out to a friend of our family, Herb Hand, who's a Westmoreland guy, played at Westmoreland High School for my father, was the line coach at Central Florida, just got named yesterday the new offensive line coach at Florida State. He's going to follow Gus Malzahn, who's a friend of his, who was the head coach at UCF, is going to be the offensive coordinator at Florida State, and Herb Hand is going to go with him. So, Coach Hand, if you're listening, I'll get you on the rock pile here. You and I will catch up, but we're proud of you this way, and we're excited to follow you at Florida State. And maybe if Florida State next year comes and plays here at Syracuse, we'll get a chance to go watch Coach Hand. So again, I want to make sure I also give a shout out this week on Sunday morning. Let me post it up here on the Sports Watch. We're going to be back on Sunday. I'm going to talk to Lehigh head coach, friend of the show, great guy, great coach, great young coach, Kevin Cahill, New York Mills alum. Um, Lehigh won the Patriot League this year in just his second year as the head coach. He's going to join me at about 9:15ish around there. And then Whitesboro standout quarterback and defensive player Memphis Ferguson is going to join me, and head coach Curtis Smith's going to join me as well. Coach was on with me after they won their Section 3 title. So we'll kick the show off about 9 o'clock, and then I'll talk to Coach Cahill, and then I'll talk to Coach Smith, and I'll talk to Memphis Ferguson as well. So I want to make sure I thank those guys as well. All right, well, listen, I'm out of time. I hopefully enjoyed the show tonight. Make sure you tune in Sunday morning at 9 o'clock. Again, follow me on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, soon to be on TikTok as well. And then for podcast listeners, if you like just the audio, I'm now on Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, and also on Spotify. So on behalf of my show tonight, the Rock Pile Chalk Talk, everybody, the rock pile is where dreams become reality. Have a good evening, everybody. Be safe. Be